Hi everyone, it's Yuanji and I'm joined by Pheano for the next episode of Attack for 20.
What? No, what are you doing? Get out of here. This is my channel.
This is the hostile takeover. How are
No,
you
no,
do-
no, 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 no. No more Attack for 20. Welcome to my channel. This is Pheanoblack, and I'm joined by Yuanji. And today we have a really interesting topic that Yuanji wanted to cover called implied value. It's something that we've talked about a lot, just like amongst each other.
Mhm.
And you expressed that you're like, I think a lot of other people need to explore this topic more as this like the next stepping stone from going from like intermediate at the game to like really good at the game.
Yeah, and I think that we were in this situation, let's say about like a year and a half ago, where, going from like an intermediate to a good player was just kind of like figuring out, oh, let me like not make stupid stupid plays, let me not like get undervalued. But I think as you and I have both seen at like the pro tour level, even at like locals, like in general, people are a lot better at that kind of stuff now.
It can be like one level is just like what do my cards do, then what do your cards do, then it's like how do I min max my hand in what I'm doing,
Hmm.
and then thinking about how my opponent's going to min max their hand.
Yeah.
This is like the next level after that of kind of the like interaction between the two.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that if nobody watches any of your other videos on this channel, I think this is like the video to watch, right? Like I think if your goal is to try to get better at Flesh and Blood and you want to win events, I think this is like the video in 2023. Who knows, like in 2 years what it's going to be about.
Wait for part two of this video.
Yeah, yeah.
What is implied value? Where did you learn this from? Can you kind of give us like a real quick what is it?
So basically, I didn't really see a lot of people talking about this concept or giving it like a term, and so I basically am borrowing the term from poker. So in poker, there's something called implied odds, and there's the idea in poker where you have just like your base like percentage to win the hand given, let's say like you have like this percent to hit like a card that you need, or they have whatever, right?
Mhm.
But implied odds is okay, like if I hit the card, what is like the probability that my opponent is gonna pay me off, and like what bet do I need to like extract from my opponent? So an example of something with good implied odds is, and I don't want to like go too deep into the poker because myself am not too well studied at the moment, but it's something
Like a
like,
surface level type of thing.
yeah, but it's like, let's say like your opponent they have two kings and you are waiting on a king for like a straight draw. If you hit the king, they're gonna make three of a kind, so it's like very likely that they're gonna like donate all their money to you. So in that case, like you have like really good implied odds for like this hand versus that hand. And this is just like a very like basic way of like understanding. So even though your actual like win percentage on hitting that king might not be that high, if you do hit the king, you're gonna get like a lot of money from your opponent. That kind of an idea.
So it's kind of like the interaction of like what you're doing and how your opponent's kind of playing the game. It's not just the numbers on the cards. It's
Mhm.
like the human element to it too, a little bit of like if I do this, that might make them do this, and then that might change my theoretical payout because of that human interaction.
Yeah, it's really based off of, like human behavior and psychology in some extent. It's just like how you and your opponents are interacting. And I think that's the idea that I wanted to carry over into Flesh and Blood because there's a lot of situations now that people are a lot better at kind of figuring out, okay, like I know what my cards do. I know like if I play like these cards in this sequence, then I'm gonna get like, I don't know, the most amount of damage out of them. I'm gonna get like 14 out of these four cards, whatever, right? A lot of people don't necessarily think, or there isn't like a defined framework for how to think about how that interacts with like what your opponent's range of hands are.
Yeah, this is like kind of like you're saying, it was something that didn't really have like a specific term and people weren't talking about. And we're going to go more into describing how this relates to Fab, but this is like something that before you said it, I had never really articulated this thought before, but it was something that like kind of intuitively did sometimes of just understanding like, oh, if I do X, Y, or Z, my opponent's going to react in a certain way and it's going to change the math of the cards and such.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people, like you say, like intuit this concept. It's like, oh, I want to take cards from my opponent. I want to like do this or that, but they're not actually thinking about the actual numbers behind it. And as we both know, like Flesh and Blood is like very much like a numbers based game. So I think putting actual numbers to the thought process will help you make like better decisions rather than just saying like, oh well, I'm gonna take like a card from my opponent. Well, how much is that card
Taking
worth?
this from like a theory and making it a science.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like how much is that card worth?
Do you have a example of like something really common that this comes up a lot in Fab?
Yeah, I think like the classic example of a card that has a lot of implied value, but not necessarily a lot of, I'm gonna call it nominal value, just like whatever is on the card, is a card like Spinal Crush. So Spinal Crush says, I spend 3 cards, I do 9 damage. That's if I block 3 cards, I also, you know, save 9 damage. It's like same as blocking, right? If I block 2 cards, I block 6, I attack with my hammer for 4. I actually get more value, you know, that way than actually playing the Spinal Crush. So like for
Hmm.
a long time, I have personally been like somebody who like really disliked the card Spinal Crush. And it wasn't really until I was like hammering out like 5 versus Oldhim that you really get like a sense for like what is the Spinal Crush actually doing, right? So an example is like Phi can do what, like 3 card 13, 4 card, like I don't know, 4 card 17 to 18 kind of
It's
regularly.
able to go above the curve of what their cards normally should be worth. Where like an average card in the game, you're probably equating to like what 3.5 kind of range,
Yeah.
just like on its own.
Yeah, yeah. So like a norm, like not a normal, but like a pretty common Phi turn can be something like I attack for 3, go again, then with a weapon for 3, go again, I Phoenix Flame, and then I Lava Burst you, right? So what a card like Spinal Crush does is it interacts with this specific like range of hands, the hands that are trying to, you know, just like play like a lot of cards and scale damage that way. And now like this Blaze Headlong that's in your hand, this Lava Burst that's in your hand, instead of the Burst being worth 5, you're like detrimenting if they want to block with a Lava Burst, or if like, or maybe they want to block with their whole hand. And so you can start to see like, okay, what is the implied value is I know if I attack with the Spinal Crush, my opponent can't do like the turn that they want to do anymore. So they have to block with cards, right? And then so your Blaze Headlong turns from 4 attack to 2 block. So I'm gaining 2 there. If you block with your Lava Burst, it's blocking for 3. It would have done 5 or maybe 6. I'm gaining 2 to 3 there. And you see like even though I'm only attacking for 9, that 9 quickly scales up to being like worth like 11, like 11, 14, whatever, depending on like how your opponent chooses to block.
Plus, if they're blocking with something like a Blaze, they still need to throw something else down too because it's only blocking for 2. So you might get a third card
Mm-hmm.
or some armor or something. So it can go up even higher from there.
Yeah, yeah, and so the general introduction to the concept is when you start to look at your opponent's cards and then taking their nominal value, and then from that point you make your play. How does their hand scale down? How do those cards devalue as a result of your play? And that's kind of like the implied value that you're gaining in the exchange, where it's like, okay, even though I'm not like necessarily attacking you for as much, I'm gaining a lot from, you know, taking damage and then throwing the spinal at you. I'm gaining because you're gonna have to block with like 2 to 3 cards, and those cards, every time you block with them, you lose like between 2 to 3 points, especially if they block 2.
It sounds like a bit of it can be boiled down to like the value you can get from your hit triggers into your opponents sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But it's more than that. Like you can say Command and Conquer that hits is worth maybe 9, where it's like 6 plus the card that you get out of them.
Yeah.
But it might be worth even more than that because the card that you get out of them might be worth more than 3 because it breaks up their round.
Mm-hmm.
It
Mm-hmm.
might also be the other end of attacking with a Command and Conquer makes them block, and you actually value them blocking more than the attacking. But
Yeah.
regardless, it's the like you're making your opponent do something that they don't want to do. They're not playing their cards to take that sort of game action. Their
Mm-hmm.
plan was never block with 2 cards. Their plan was hold the grip, stand and deliver.
Yeah.
Now
So
their math is just completely different because they had to give up some cards.
yeah, exactly. And I think that the idea of forcing your opponent to do something that they don't want to do, like the difference between what they don't want to do and the difference between what they want to do, that's kind of like the value that you're gaining, and what we're talking about here. I think for Flesh and Blood, it's usually in the form of hit triggers. Usually hit triggers, are what gets your opponent to block. I mean, we do also see at like certain times it'll be like the break point for like if I do like this much damage to you, then you're going to die to another card. So like, like brutes don't have a lot of hit triggers in their kit, but if they get you to 2 life, then that means that you could be dead to a reckless swing. And so they're also playing like this game of trying to get you to that point. So if you're like facing an attack, let's say you're at 3 and attacking you for 4, like maybe you want to put an extra card in front of it, and so then they can gain value off of that. So I think most of the decks in this game, if not for like hit triggers, at least like every deck, has the capability to just like, do enough damage to kill you. As always, like your life total is always a hit trigger, right? Like if you if you
On
get
the
hit to
die.
0, then the game is over, right? And then
That's my
so
favorite hit trigger. Actually, no, it might be draw. It might draw 2 cards might be my favorite hit trigger.
I think every deck has this element in it. Some decks play off of it more than other decks. A lot of decks play more off of just like the raw numbers. But I think it's important to understand like how these interact, especially because a lot of these drive, what the good decisions are in various matchups that that I think a lot of people struggle against. So, for example, I think a lot of people struggle, and you've been pretty public about this, into fatigue Oldhim or like more defensive Oldhim strategies. And I think it's because a lot of people don't really understand that the implied value for them attacking into the Oldhim, unless they can, mount this like really strong attack, is close to 0. And in fact, like the optimal play for the Oldhim oftentimes is to block, like 9 damage. So you attack the Oldhim for like 10. You're actually doing what the Oldhim wants to do. You're making their plays more optimal than, if you had just like not attacked them at all.
Yeah, I think there's more to that too, where I need to make a whole nother video about this, where it's
Yeah.
like the like learning curve of how to beat fatigue strategies is not intuitive.
Yeah.
And this is definitely a big part of it. I'm just gonna make a whole nother video about that to just talk about it, because I think that's just like a whole nother big rabbit hole to go down.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a lot of that with Ultim for sure, of like the implied value of they want to be blocking, so maybe you shouldn't just like head empty, no thoughts, throw your hand at them.
Right.
And you need to be creating big rounds that can go over the top of what they're doing, but that's not necessarily intuitive. You're not doing that necessarily in other matchups.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's like you have to learn that that's the correct thing to do.
Yeah, yeah. Like a big part of the Five versus Oldhim matchup, that when we were working on Five versus Oldhim for Worlds, I think that one thing that we didn't like quite figure out was like capitalizing on this concept of how do we like extract implied value in this matchup where my deck is only, just like throwing attacks at you, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't really until after the event that really understood that, a card like Energy Potion ends up being, one of the most powerful cards in that matchup. And you might be like, oh, well, why is Energy Potion one of the most powerful cards? Like you play, you just get like 2 resources. And so like level 1 thinking is like, okay, like, well, the Energy Potion lets you, set up like this huge round for your opponent, right? It lets you pay for your Art of Wars. It lets you pay for like, your attacks that cost resources, and you can go like really wide. And so while all of that is true, like it does set up like the big turns, actually the turn that you play the Energy Potion, you're also extracting value from your opponent. And this isn't something that we really understood at the time, but I want to kind of just like let everybody who's like watching
Because
this.
like at face value, the energy potion should just be worth the 2 resources.
Mhm, yeah.
You block with 3 cards maybe, or maybe block with 2 instead of an arsenal, play an energy potion.
Yep.
It should just be face value what the card's worth, or
Mhm.
maybe a little bit more because you are playing a multiplicative scaling damage deck. Well, we're not even talking about that.
Yeah, we're not talking about, because like the awkward part for the Oldhim is that if you look at how Oldhim decks are constructed, right? And I think this is true for most Guardian decks. Their most powerful, most disruptive attacks usually play off of 3 cards. So it'll be like you pitch 2 cards and you play like your Crippling Crush, your Spinal Crush, or like whatever, right? Command and Conquer Pummel, that's 3 cards. So like all of their like most powerful plays are 3-card plays. Contrast that, their like 2-card plays are usually very subpar. Obviously, Oldhim has the ability to just like straight up like command and conquer you. But outside of that, like what are they gonna do to you? They're gonna sometimes Enlighten Strike. Sometimes they just want to like hammer, like pitch a blue, swing your hammer, and then
Hmm.
arsenal a card. If you know their arsenal card is like a dead card, like if you know it's like some random blue, it like constrains it even further. Then their like 3 card hands, essentially, like if you include the arsenal, aren't that great either, right?
Hmm.
And so you get into the situation where it's like, okay, I'm gonna poke at you. I'm gonna do 4. I'm gonna do 3. You block 2 cards. Now I have an empty. I have 2 cards left, and I have an empty arsenal. I just play energy potion, and so you block 2 cards from your hand, and you have 2 cards left. You can't like really use those 2 cards because you have an arsenal, which is a dead card, and you have 2 cards in your hand.
As the Oldhim.
Yeah, as the Oldhim. Like maybe if the arsenal is, like a blue glacial, I'm gonna like what? I'm gonna throw 8 at you, but then I'm also getting rid of my arsenal. I can't like crown the next turn. I can't block as much. You're putting the Oldhim into like a bind where honestly, like most of the time, their best play is gonna be, like to swing their hammer at you, and that's it. By playing the energy potion, you already did 3 damage to your opponent by playing the energy potion because they were gonna block that card regardless, right? Like they were planning to block that card out of their hand. So no matter like whatever card it was gonna be, it was gonna do 3 damage.
So essentially, it's like Oldhim has a hard time using all of his cards.
Mm-hmm.
So by you not presenting him an opportunity to use his cards on both sides of the turn cycle, defensively and offensively,
Yeah.
he can only use some of his hand offensively, thus IPing himself. Of him, he just can't use every card in his hand. So he just has cards in hand stranded,
Yeah.
and then ends the turn with just extra stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So you essentially got extra value. The energy pot was worth the energy pot itself plus the cards you stranded in his hand.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily that they can't use all the cards. It's like specifically that they can't use 2 cards. Or if you
Mhm.
gave them 4 cards, a lot of the times they can't use, that 4th card. They can
Mhm.
only use 3 cards. A big part of this is also like when I was preparing to play like Viserai into Icelander for the Auckland calling. Same idea. Icelander can't play 3 to 4 cards from their hand. They can't, right?
They need like a scar for a scar.
Yeah,
and
they attack for
that's
wound.
about it.
Yeah, exactly. They attack with Wounded Bull. They attack with, I don't know, like an Ice Vein. Not always even like their attack is like
Most
two
of their hands
cards.
that at most will be like 3 cards plus an arsenal.
Yeah.
5 cards, very hard.
Yeah. So when you just like make rune chants and you just like pass the turn, like, they can't do anything with that. With the extra cards. And then so like you get to block. They attack you like block with your cards. You just make a rune chant. They can't block. Like you're wasting cards on your side, but they're also wasting cards on their side. And while you're wasting cards, you're also building up like a turn that you're gonna do like an attack. And so I think like thinking about deck construction,
Which also preys on a different weakness, like we described earlier,
Mhm.
where for Oldhim specifically, not Icelander, having that big round to go over the top of what they're able to block is important. So
Yeah.
you're able to attack them on 2 different weaknesses at the same time.
Right.
Oh, they can't use everything, and also I want to create these big rounds later. Say less, let's do both at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think thinking about these kinds of things when it comes to deck construction, when it comes to blocking, let's say you're the Oldhim player and you don't know like how deep your opponent is going to attack. Like maybe you don't want to block with a Spinal Crush first. You block with a Spinal Crush first. All of a sudden, they just stop attacking. You don't have anything to do with the rest of your cards, right?
Mhm.
And so it impacts like both ways that we're playing the game, both when you're like constructing attacks on your opponent. But then also, I think when you're blocking, you want to block in a way that like minimizes the implied value from your opponent. In that sense, I think this is just like it. The game is actually quite deep. Where like the sequence, like you have like attacking, like everybody knows, like you gotta like know like you're sequencing for like attacks, right? But also the
Mhm.
sequencing of your blocks is important too. Like this is the first card I'm gonna block. This is the second card. It's not as simple as like, oh, I'm just gonna block like these 2 cards out of your hand. Actually, the first card that you block with versus the second card that you block with is also like an important thing to consider when you're like in the business of like min maxing.
Or where in the chain you should actually start blocking,
Yeah,
because then
yeah,
might mean you have
exactly.
to block with more cards later.
Yeah, exactly. And
That's an
so
easy one to pick up just playing against Maximum Momentum once.
yeah. But I think like choosing the sequence that you're gonna block cards with, choosing when to block, like making these decisions, like without kind of creating this framework for understanding, oh, I'm giving my opponent value because I'm gonna like force myself down suboptimal plays, or I'm gonna try to force my opponent to make suboptimal plays. Putting a number behind it is pretty important.
Okay, so next thing to talk about was kind of the idea of when to demand a card out of someone.
Yeah.
Anyone that's watched me play, they'll hear me say, "Give me a card." That's like something I've always loved doing,
Yeah,
because like sometimes it'll be like asking for a card out of someone on certain rounds is a really big deal. Asking for a card out of someone isn't a big deal.
right.
You want to kind of go into that?
Yeah, and I think a lot of this is having knowledge of what your opponent's deck is trying to do and like the types of turns that they're gonna have. So an example is like Lexi just used their rain razors and they like shot 3 arrows, whatever. That was their like big turn, right? They did a 5 card turn.
Did the big ding dong round?
Yeah, they don't have a ponder token, whatever. They're just drawing 4 random cards. And so when you're like thinking like, oh, should I be, taking damage to try to disrupt them after this? Well, what is like their average follow-up going to be? Is it likely that their average follow-up is going to be, as strong? Versus like they have the rain razors in their arsenal and you know about it. Then how much is the disruption going to be worth, right? In that case, like if I know that you have this rain razors that's in your hand, but you don't want to like use it for whatever reason, and you like attacked me, do I really want to be blocking in that situation? Like I kind of want to just like attack you so that you can't like use the rain razors, or I make you use it suboptimally, you get it in for like 2 damage or 4 damage. You don't get it in for like 6, 8 damage. Demanding a card out of your opponent isn't equal. It's dependent on the types of hands that they're gonna have. Like the more setup was involved, this is like something to really pay attention to. Like how long has that card been in your opponent's arsenal, right? If that card has been in your opponent's arsenal for a long time, they're trying to like, create this like big turn. It just like hasn't shown up yet. You probably want to be like attacking them pretty hard versus I like just have 4 random cards. Like how important is it to just be, like YOLO, like trading life at this point?
And
These
that's
are
like
all
a really
things to
easy one to put a
consider.
number on too, where it's like the rain razors is worth 2 per arrow.
Yeah.
So if you're able to disrupt your opponent, you're taking that rain raisins down from maybe 6 value, maybe even 8, depending on what their hand is, if they got the crazy hand. But
Mhm.
let's just be safe and call it 6.
Yeah.
If they end up blocking with 2 cards, you're probably bringing that down to 2 or 4 damage, depending on what their set and what their 2 cards in
Yeah,
hand
yeah,
is.
like it, or
So
if
you're
they're gonna use it at all, and then if they don't use it, then you're creating a
absolute
vulnerability.
victory.
Yeah, like you're creating a vulnerability for them. Then like on your subsequent attacks, you gain more value. It's like, oh, I attack you with a command and conquer. You have this rain razors in your arsenal plus this other card, and you don't know if I have a pummel or not. Like most of the time, like they want to be blocking like 10, right? Your
Hmm.
and your command and conquer is just like gaining a lot more value as a result of the turn that you played it, as opposed to you attack your opponent with a command and conquer, they just have like some like random card in their arsenal. They might not even want to block it.
Hmm.
It's like, here, take my blue searing shot, whatever.
Didn't care about that anyways.
Yeah, and so thinking about like how can you maximize your opponent's like suboptimal plays is really important for finding like the right timings for things. Honestly, like a
Hmm.
lot of the time, like you don't have full control over it, but when you do, like the times that you do have control over, like, do I throw the command and conquer this turn or do I wait? Like, I think
Well, I
those
think
are
that
the
goes back
difference.
also to your comment earlier on blocking, where it's like, think more carefully about how you're blocking because you remove that opportunity from yourself sometimes when you block improperly, where it's like, oh, if I had just saved this, I can now put myself in a spot to do that later. Like maybe I don't block with the spinal crush and I set it, and then the opportunity presents itself in a few rounds to do that because they came in with a weak hand, then set up with a big hand. Oh, well, I still have this because I saved it from earlier. Now this gets a ton of value because
Hmm.
I was keeping 2 cards anyways because they came in weak. Well, stop punching me now.
Yeah, 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 and I think that is.
It's all interconnected.
Yeah, yeah, and it's kind of tough because like a lot of these types of like things, you don't really find out about the mistake that you made until like 2, 3 turns down the line. And I think everyone for the most part is really good now at playing, the one turn, and they're pretty good about playing, the next turn after that. But like making the decisions that, will have these impacts like 3, 4 turns down the line is like really tough. And I mess up on it all the time still. Uh
Macro versus micro things.
yeah, yeah, and it's like one of those things where I think by having this framework of understanding, okay, like I know that this is the type of turn that I want to be playing my disruptive attacks for maximum value, then I am getting more out of the situation than I otherwise was before.
So let's just wrap this up by
Yeah, let's put
kind
some
of
numbers
yeah,
and
making
do
it more tangible.
do some
Science.
examples. Here's an example that might be close to you. Lexi versus Dromai, pretty relevant matchup currently, and even
Hmm.
probably will be later on after Living Legend. Dromai wants to be setting up these permanents. Lexi counteracts this by attacking them at times, and also having poppers in their deck. So how much what are like the key cards for each side in the matchup? I would argue, for example, on the Dromai side, that Rake the Embers is probably one of her best cards into Lexi. And the reason for that, and we can break this down numerically, is because you are really minimizing your opponent's value on their popper. Because if they pop, they're popping 1/3 of the cards, or 1/3 of the value of that card, right? But then also, like, when they attack into it, they're also losing value. So I play Rake the Embers, I attack with my 3 Ash Wings, whatever, they do 3 damage this turn, right? If you don't do anything to them, then the next turn they're going to do another 3 damage. So my 2 cards plus Ash have done 6 damage. So that's not super impressive yet. One more turn, now it's 9 damage, now it's 12 damage, 15 damage. It starts getting out of hand, right? So at some point in time, like the Lexi has to do something. They have to either pop one of the Ash Wings or like hit them with like an arrow. Ideally, like you don't want to be doing that, but that's just kind of what you have to
Sometimes
do.
it's the life you live.
Yeah. And so and so I attack your, even with like a blue arrow, right? I attack it for 2. That's like 1 card that I didn't block with. So it's worth at least 3. So I spend 3 on like this 1 damage that's like scaling out over the course of however many turns. I'm losing out on that over time. So if I like spend 3 on each of your Ash Wings, just from me attacking them, you're gaining 9 out of it, plus however many times you get to attack with it. That card has like huge value, and most of that is due to your opponent making a play that they don't want to make. Like if I was playing like Katsu, for example, and if Kadachi's, then that card like Rake the Embers devalues considerably, because like what am I giving up? I'm giving up 1 resource to kill an Ashwing for the most part. And
And then
so
as Lexi, I'm never playing my deck because I want to block or because I want to attack dragons. So anytime I do that, you're extracting a lot of value out of me.
Yeah, exactly. Like numerically, like I think that the Rake the Embers is worth at least 9 from your opponent like attacking them, plus like however much damage that you get to do with it. So it's like a 2 card, at least like a 2 card 11 to 12. Like that's pretty crazy. On the other side of things, for like the poppers, this is like where I think it gets like a little bit trickier, because it's like you're working with unknown information. The dragons are just on the field. You get to decide what you want to do. I think when you have poppers, it's like you don't really know if your opponent has a popper or not. And this is like where understanding of where people are at in the meta, how many poppers is like standard for people to run, is pretty important. It's a real big difference if they are at 6 poppers versus if they're at 4. Like percentage wise in their deck, it's like a huge difference. If they're at 9 poppers, it's also like very big difference. Quick math for everybody out there: in a 60 card deck, you have 15 unique hands in first cycle, right? So just like if you have 6 poppers, like the probability that you're going to draw like one of these cards in one of these 15 hands, every hand you get like a chance to draw it. It's like, I think it's like about 6/15 to have a popper in any given hand. And so like you do like the math, like okay, well then like let me double check.
you lost yourself a little bit.
I think that's my heuristic, but I want to just make sure that it's correct. I just want to I don't want to mislead the people. Yeah, it's 35%.
35, okay.
With 6 hits. So like my heuristic is just like you have 15 unique hands. It's like around the number of successes divided by like the number of like different hands that you have. So it's like 35%. If you have 4, then that that number goes way down. Then that number is 25%. And so I think that a lot of the times when people are like thinking about when drummers are deciding like what to play, like whether or not I attack with like my extra dragons and stuff, they're making like kind of like a binary decision. It's like, oh, he either has the popper or they don't have the popper, and they're not like making the correct evaluation. Like like what's like the percentage chance? Like how much am I losing? I see this especially a lot when there's like boards where you'll have like a Yenderai or like a Kyloria, a Mirror Guy, and three Ashwings, and it's like obviously you're gonna attack with like your Kyloria first with the no Phantasm. That's like no brainer, and then you attack with
Mhm.
your Ashwings, and then they didn't pop it, and then you gotta like really think to yourself. It's like, okay, well, I'm only giving up like 2 damage by like not attacking the Mirror Guy. It's like, how much am I actually giving up by like not attacking the Mirror Guy on the chance that they have the popper? Oh, maybe like it's bad for me because then they can draw like another popper. But then if you break that down further, well, it's like, well, if you're giving up 2 damage just like straight up from like not attacking the Mirror Guy, they would have had to have made the play to decide to take like your Ashwings and to not pop to save themselves, like 4 damage down the line. Plus, they pop your Mirror Guy. They have to draw another popper, for your Kyloria, and it's just like most like
You're
I
like giving up value so that way they don't gank you on something, but then by you not doing it, you already gave them the value
yeah,
anyways.
yeah, exactly. It's like you already gave
You should
up
have
like
just
close
attacked
to a
because you just
card.
gave up value.
Yeah, you gave up close to a card by like not attacking the Mirror Guy. And so a lot of the times like these like little plays don't add up to necessarily like on at face value you're like, oh, it's not a big deal, I'm just giving up 2 damage here. But when you like accumulate that over like all of the games that you play, all of across the tournament, you're actually, I think, leaving a lot on the table. And like in all the games that end up being like blowouts, like sure, it's like not a big deal, but in the couple of games that actually matter, like you are actually like, by them having like this card in their deck, they're already like making you play suboptimally. I wonder if that makes sense to everybody who's like watching this. The last thing that I wanted to touch on for like the Lexi Dromai matchup is just like why Endless Arrow is so important from the Ranger side. And it's because you give up the least when you hit a dragon with Endless Arrow. So if I hit your, like Kyloria with Endless Arrow versus like attacking your face, like if I attack your face with it, it's worth 4 for the most part, right? Maybe it's worth 6 if you block it with 2 cards. I attack your Kyloria, now I'm doing 0 damage to you, but I'm killing your dragon. I gave up, I only needed to hit it for 2 to kill it. I'm overkilling it by 2. I gave up 2 damage there, but I gain the card back. So it doesn't actually cost me a card, it just costs me an action point. This concept, like usually like the action point is worth between like 1 to 2. So I'm not giving up as much. And I like in the framework of implied value that we're trying to get across, it's like I want to give up the least. I want to play in like the least suboptimal way, knowing that like putting these permanents on the board, like you're making me attack them. I have to attack them no matter what. Like if I never attack any of your dragons, I just straight up lose, right? Like you're just gonna you
That's a
play
legal
one,
choice.
yeah, you play one Kyloria, then you play like a Yender, like I'm just gonna lose the game. Like they ramp up like way too fast. If I'm gonna be attacking these dragons no matter what, then I want to be attacking them with the thing that costs me the least.
I think an interesting thing there too is on the flip side is when you know they have the endless, what's the value of your dragon? Because there is an implied value of it's just dying to an endless arrow, so
Mm-hmm.
you don't really extract full value of it on the other side. So it can change kind of your play patterns on the other side of the matchup, where they're just going to get picked off for free.
Yeah, maybe you want to, save, like instead of you just like YOLO playing like the dragon out and attacking with it. Like let's say you have Kyloria, you can like 2 card play the Kyloria, attack with it. They're gonna have to like block with a card. Then the next turn they're gonna attack with the Endless Arrow. Maybe you want to block an extra card, arsenal the Kyloria, that you can play like like a 3 dragon hand, because that Endless
Or
Arrow.
wait for them to get the endless out
Yeah,
or something.
because like most of the time, like you don't have a board. Like oftentimes, like if the Lexi is not like presenting lethal on you, like they kind of just want to like hold on to the Endless Arrow. You're also making them, like then if they only throw 2 arrows, they have like an extra action point. They don't like spend it. You're also making them play in a way that is suboptimal by by not creating a board. There's like different ways that you're interacting, and so just like just dumping whatever resources you have in what is for that turn the most efficient way is not necessarily the best way, because of this idea.
How do we put some math on this?
On what? On whether or not you want to delay
Yeah,
your
this is
dragon.
a lot of theory. How do we actually equate this to raw numbers?
Yeah, so it's like every time I waste an action point, it's worth between like 1 to 2.
Mhm.
If I'm the Lexi player and I have an endless arrow, it's been like sitting there. I have it set.
Not specifically the endless arrow
Oh,
thing.
okay.
The like how do we equate value to the whole playing dragons versus poppers? Like the whole implied
Oh,
value
yeah,
of
yeah,
that
yeah. Yeah.
interaction.
Okay, so that equation, you have to figure, so your dragon costs you at minimum, or sorry, at maximum, it's like usually 2 cards, right? It'll be the card that you pitch for it, plus whatever, plus the card that it is.
Hmm.
So most of the time, the dragons are plus value because they cost Ash. It's like baked into that cost. So when you play a Kylora, you attack with it. It's like attacking for 4, and then they're gonna attack with it for something that's usually more than 2. So if they attack with it for 3, then you're basically you're doing like a 2-card 7 with a hit trigger, right? It's like 3 health plus 4 attack.
So first we figure out the value per card that we spent on the exchange with how many cards it cost us, how much damage we got out of it, how much value it soaked on the return side of getting attacked, and
Mhm.
we figure out that number.
Yeah. And so every turn that the dragon stays around, it just gets like another multiplier for like how much power it has, right? So your
Hmm.
Ashwing stays around, every turn it stays around, it's 1 more damage onto the total value that it brings. When you are running into a popper, first you have to consider, okay, like, am I stranding cards in my hand? If I just end up, I see drama players do this all the time. They get popped and they just like pitch a card to Furnace. What do you do? What are you
What are you
doing?
doing?
Yeah, they just end up like they pitch like they're like, oh,
I just IP2'd myself. Oh no!
yeah, it's like oh, the draw match player is like no blocks. I did no blocks, and then I'm just gonna like play my dragon, attack. Oh wait, you popped it. Now what do I do? I was gonna play this command and conquer. Now I'm kind of boned. So you have to figure out first if you're gonna have any cards stranded, right? So if you are gonna have cards stranded, then okay, that's very bad. Like you don't wanna do that. So in the case where we brought up earlier, like if I have the choice between like putting in a mirror guy attack in the middle and then playing command and conquer, or playing a command and conquer without attacking the mirror guy, I can see a world where sure, like I choose not to attack with my, because I know that my opponent doesn't want to pop the Ashwings, and then so I get to like do my thing. I get to play my command and conquer with the furnace. On the flip side, it's probably incorrect for your opponent not to pop the Ashwing in that case, but
let's not
still,
let's not talk about
yeah,
that.
but still, like that's the
We're not
that
talking about the implied value of misplays.
yeah, but that's like that's what you're giving up, right? When your opponent pops it, if there are no cards stranded in your hand, then it's essentially turning the 2 cards that you spent on the dragon into 1 card from your opponent. So let's just call like that base value 3 for like a card. So I pitch a card for my Kyloria. I go Ash neutral. I play the Kyloria, attack with it. It gets popped. My Kyloria in that instance is worth like 3. So it ranges between being worth, like 7,
Infinity.
11, whatever, to 3. And then you multiply that 3 by the percentage that they have the popper, and then you take like whatever, like your infinity value, times like when they don't have the popper, right? And I think
Mhm.
like pretty reasonably for dragons like Kyloria, like Chromai, like they're gonna get hit the next turn. So you have to understand like what your opponent is gonna be hitting it with. So most of the time they're gonna be hitting it with something that's worth like 3 to 4.
Mhm.
So it'll be like whatever it attacks with plus like 3 to 4.
So like let's not go into the dragon sticking around multiple rounds. It's probably like 7 per dragon
Yeah,
when it's not popped, 3 when it is pop. So then you take the 3 and it's the percentage of time they have a popper.
yeah. But then I would say that the flip side to this is that the more dragons that you can put on the board simultaneously, the more difficult it is and the more value that your opponent is going to have to give up to clear them all. So when you just play like the single dragon, it's like worth like about like 7 or 8. I play 3 dragons out. Like I set up a turn where I go, like Azulai, Kyloria, Mirgai, whatever it is, right? Now
So
I
you're
have
smart for not IPing yourself when
yeah,
I pop you.
yeah. So I have 3 things that are attacking now. Now you get to attack with them all. Plus, that like when I'm going to be attacking you back, let's say like for Lexi, like I'm gonna be like tossing, I don't know, like my remorseless or like infecting shot or whatever. I'm giving up more by having to clear 2. Now this isn't the
Mhm.
case for every aggro deck. Like aggro decks like Phi give up like nothing to attack your dragon. In fact, sometimes they gain because they proc mask and momentum. But that's the general concept, right? Like most of the time, the more dragons I put out on the table at the same time, the more likely it is that one of them survives to attack an extra time. So if you count like each dragon is worth between 6 to 7, whatever. Like 1 cost dragons are worth about like are worth about 7. 0 cost dragons worth about 6, right?
Mhm.
Then if you play 3 of them, then the third one, let's say if it's gonna stay alive, then that one gets to attack an extra time. So that one is worth, like 9. And then so that's how you accumulate more value across by sequencing all your things together as opposed to, just you draw, you play it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like here's what I got.
Show me what you got.
Yeah, and I hope that that is like enough math for people to start, conceptualizing it in the right way. Next example, this is also I think a fairly common matchup in the current meta. Azalea against Oldhim. So I think at the very beginning of the format when Azalea was just playing like Death Dealer with the Skullbone Cross Wrap, it was very Oldhim favored because like Oldhim can just stack their deck with defense reactions. Normally Azalea gets a lot of implied value off of hitting your opponent with like Red in the Ledger, hitting your opponent with Remorseless, hitting your opponent with Barb Undertow, whatever the case is, right? And with Dominate, your opponent can only block 1 card. They can't play like all their cards in their hand, so you usually gain between like 1 to 2 cards just off of the hit trigger worth of value. In addition
Them
to
not being able to play all their cards is the implied value in this
yes,
case.
yes, and so in addition to like
Kind of
whatever.
like the similar to the whole Oldhim thing, but in this case, we're stripping the agency to do that from them.
Yeah,
Where
so
in
like
the Oldhim scenario, it's they physically can't because the way their deck is structured. Where this is, we're not giving them the option to do that.
yeah, so it's like in the previous example, it was like, okay, you're gonna block with these cards, so that's why I'm gaining value. Here, it's like you can't block with the cards, but you also can't play them,
Mm-hmm.
and so there's there's that aspect of it. Now, Oldhim plays around that strategy very well by stacking their deck with defense reactions. They have staunch responses, sink belows, favor scenes, whatever you name it. They have like a lot of ways to get around that. So, kind of a newer way that a lot of azaleas
I'll
are.
block.
Yeah, a lot of ways that azaleas are kind of counteracting this because previously it was like pretty common for azalea to get fatigued. Is now I think one of the more popular azalea builds is to build with Sandscour, Great Bow, New Horizon, and having access to these 2 arsenal spots really lets you one set up like the big turns against Oldhim, which is kind of what you want to be doing instead of just throwing like whatever with Dominate, hoping that it gets through because most of the time it's not. Yeah, cross fingers.
Open
You
a
only have
prayer.
you only have so many big Dominate turns in your deck, and they
Mm-hmm.
have however many defense reactions. So the new way to like attack that is by playing Dreadbore with this like 2 arsenal style. And so I get to try to set up these 6 card hands. In addition, I'm playing this card Dreadbore, which says all my arrows can't be blocked with defense reactions from your hand. So now, like doing little quick maths, like most I think old hymns currently run around like between 8 to 10 defense reactions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So with 8 defense reactions, let's just consult the calculator. I think it's about like one in every other hand. 68. Yeah, plus 5.
Calculating, calibrating to primes.
Yeah. It's 44%. So 44% of the time they have at least one defense reaction in their hand. So you have to figure that like each defense reaction is worth about like 4 block, right?
Mhm.
You're gaining 0.44 times 4 just by like this existing. Like every single turn, this is how much like EV you're getting just from the Dreadboard existing. And so in that sense, like the presence of this equipment is like generating implied value for you, because your opponent is gonna get stuck with like these defense reactions in their hand. They're gonna be forced to either pitch them or to find a way to arsenal them, that they couldn't like otherwise do as easily. You figure like if you're like Oldhim and you draw a hand that's like what? It's like blue defense reaction, and I don't know, like another defense reaction. Like, what are you gonna do? Like, you can't do anything. They attack you with dominate. You can't block with either defense reaction. You block for 3, you attack for 4, and then you arsenal defense. Like none of it is good, right?
So then you might convert their defense reaction into like 1 point of value from them, like pitching something like
then they're gonna pitch it
like crown or shield or something.
Exactly. So they're gonna end up like pitching it. And so you're gaining like every time they pitch like a red defense reaction, you gain 3. And so this is like really strong counterplay. How can you play around this, right? Like, it seems kind of tough. It came up in one of my RTNs last weekend, where I found myself as the Oldhim in this situation, where I know my opponent is playing, New Horizons, and I know that they're probably playing Dreadbore into Oldhims. So my solution was to just keep the defense reactions in my deck that I felt good about just arsenaling. So those were like my 2 red staunch responses, and then I'm gonna play like the blue staunch responses, whatever, right? So I'm gonna minimize, like, there's almost like a 0% chance that I will draw both red staunches in my hand at the same time. So I am minimizing the amount of value that my opponent's getting off of the Dreadbore. And then I board out all of my Sync Belows, all my Favor Scenes. And then I think I was playing like all my Go Again attacks. I was playing like Zealous Belting and Anothos. So you just like, you flip the script on your opponent, where it's like, okay, I'm not going to, like, I know that you are giving something up. You are giving up the ability to get to exchange like a resource.
I know that you know that I know that you know that I want to block.
Yeah, so because you are giving up this bow that lets you exchange a resource for a card from the top of your deck, essentially drawing a card, you're giving up some of the power in your deck, right? And then I will give up my like defensive ability in exchange for being able to, go plus whenever I draw like a Zealous Belting with Anothos. And so it's just like, I think that the reason why I did this is to minimize the amount of implied value that my opponent is gaining across all the cards that they are playing to, like Widowmakers, Dreadbores, Release the Tension. I'm like minimizing the value of all these cards. I'm turning their like Release the Tension to like a Nimbleism. So before maybe it was worth like a lot. Now it's just like worth 3 because I'm damage racing you. That is, and like by minimizing the amount of implied value that my opponent is gaining, then that is how I found a way to gain an edge in the matchup. Now, I don't recommend doing this necessarily like all the time, because
scouting ahead, maybe it's fine.
Yeah. But like if you know for example that your opponent is going to do this, here's a way that you can think outside the box, be creative to use these concepts for practical applications.
Mm-hmm. I think though that like highlights something about implied value though. I joked on the I know that you know that I know that thing.
Yeah.
But that is a big part of it, where you're getting value because kind of what level like each of us is doing. It's like, I know that I want to dominate things. I know that you want to block my dominate things. I know that I want to stop you from stopping me from blocking my things.
Yeah.
So then you know that I know that you know, and like you're able to generate value by kind of reverse Unoing your opponent in a way, and stripping them of their value. And that's like a lot of what this concept is, stripping your opponent of their value, which can only happen when you kind of know that aspect of whatever's going on. And okay, I know that you're doing X, Y, and Z. I'm going to attack this on a certain angle. to punish you for that.
Yeah, and I think I would say that the most important aspect of how you can, you as the viewers or listeners can start, applying this is a lot of preparation. Just like knowing like how the decks are going to be built, knowing what are the cards that people like to play, and by knowing these things, by doing your homework, then you can come up with, okay, I know that these powerful cards interact with my deck on this axis, so I'm either going to minimize that or I'm going to maximize my ability to interact with my opponent's like powerful cards so that they don't get to do what they want to do. It like in both ways, it's like a push pull. Both, I want to make it so that they don't get as much out of me. I don't have to play suboptimally as much of the time, and I want to try to make them play suboptimally as often as possible.
It's such a simple thing, but like it's one thing that I find myself saying a lot to a lot of my locals and people that I teach. Just sit down and play 10 games of every deck. So much you can gain by just doing that. So that way you can start to visualize what turn cycles look like in that matchup on the as that deck.
Yeah.
Where you're like, oh, I now know after playing it a bit, I really like it when I have a big hand on Lexi. So I'm not really as threatened as much when next time I go to an RTN and I face the Lexi, if they're just coming at me with a 4-card hand, I'm not spooked and playing around things that don't even exist. Where I'm like, oh my god, they could just kill me here. Like, no, it's a 4-card hand. Calm down.
Yeah.
And I see that a lot where people will see crazy things happen in a deck, and then they'll get spooked and think that could happen out of anywhere. And it's like, no, a lot of these things are very telegraphed. And once you see it, and from your side of you play the deck, now you know what it looks like on the other side, where you can just Millennium Eye your opponent when they have these things.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of weird that they're really protecting this card in Arsenal. I think it might be a Mordred Tide or something like that, where you like can kind of start sussing these things out. It's really important. It's really simple, and it's like not anything that anyone has ever not said before. Play decks to figure out what they do.
Yeah.
But a lot of this game really does come down to understanding game plans and what turns look like. So, because a lot of this game, the way decks are designed is about creating gameplay loops. So you're going to see these patterns come up over and over and over again with every deck in this game. You're not playing decks to do inconsistent things. Your deck just won't work then unless you're Rhinar.
I like the little brute dig. I rolled a 1. Now I don't know what to do. What's going on?
All right. Anything else you want to add about implied value before we head out?
Now, I just wanted to say to everyone, like, I hope that like this video was helpful in trying to get you to think like a little bit farther than maybe you have thought before, going to different matchups rather than just like, here's my strategy for the matchup, understanding like why it is and how you can construct like new strategies when the time arises when we're going to get a new format soon. Like, how can I create new strategies looking at the cards that people want to be playing?
Confirmed Living Legend format coming soonish. If you guys liked this and you want to see some more, I would maybe like doing a series of this with Yuanji. We have a couple other ideas lined up for other videos like this. So if this is something that you guys are interested in, please let me know down below. I would love the feedback. It's really helpful for knowing what you guys want to see in the future. Other than that, where can everyone find you?
Yeah, I do semi-regular streaming on TCG Runaways Twitch. And I also am on Fable Hunters, so it's more of like a collector-focused channel where we talk a lot about Flesh and Blood news. Saint Hung gets to show off his cool cards and collection and swag and stuff, and we talk just about the collecting and just like enjoying the game as a product aspect of it rather than the gameplay aspect of it. On TCG Runaways, we also have our own YouTube channel where we post like a lot of, or not a lot of, we post like a couple of strategies.
Overselling yourself.
Yeah, I'm overselling right now. Or we're trying to post
there are
more.
Things.
Yeah, we're trying to post more, but it's hard because like I think in general everything that we post on the YouTube channel, we try to make it valuable even for high level players. So just very few but high value videos.
I actually have a couple of them queued up on my top of my computer. I need to watch later.
Yeah.
Even though I think some of it things I already know, it's just like it's still interesting hearing about them of just people's high level thoughts.
Yeah.
I'll have links for those in the description down below. Please check them out. And thanks for so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me on the show. Attack for 20. New camera. You didn't get any more handsome.
More handsome by comparison.